Your Majesty, I know that you're ready for the Battle of Agincourt tomorrow. Believe me, I've paid my dues just like you, and I realize that time after time you've been criticized for the wildness of your younger days, especially that robbery incident at Gad's Hill. But since you made sure that all the money was returned, I'd say you committed no crime. Listen, when it comes to poor decisions and bad mistakes, I've made a few myself. Believe me when I say that I too have had my share of sand kicked in my face, but I've come through, and I mean to tell you that for England's sake, you need to go on and on and on and on. Rally your outnumbered troops and tell them, my friends, I will not be ransomed, and we will keep on fighting till the end of this battle. It's a good thing that you were able to intercept those traitors, Cambridge, Scroop, and Grey at Southampton, before they could betray you, because you have no time for losers, and believe me, sailing to France with those English monsters aboard would have been no pleasure cruise. Since the French outnumber you 5-1, you might easily consider it a challenge before the whole human race, but keep telling your troops as you go once more into the breach, we ain't gonna lose, so keep on fighting till the end, because when we are the champions over France, England will be such a great and formidable power that we will honestly be able to say, we are the champions of the world. Oh, by the way, I was able to look over that Band of Brothers speech for tomorrow. That's gold, Harry, gold. In the 1974 Mel Brooks movie Blazing Saddles, villains terrorized the residents of Rock Ridge to get them to leave town. When the sheriff says, well, can't you see that's the last act of a desperate man? One of the townfolk replies, we don't care if it's the first act of Henry V. As you can see, this play is quite prominent in pop culture, so let's take a look at the plot. The play starts off with a prologue in which Chorus, a narrator who magnificently addresses the audience throughout the play, apologizes for the limitations of the theater, saying, oh, for a muse of fire, that we could have actual princes and a kingdom for a stage to do justice to Henry V's glorious story. Chorus challenges the audience to use its imagination to overcome the limitations of the stage. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. After getting input from his advisors, and in particular the Archbishop of Canterbury, representing the Catholic Church, the king decides to invade France after being told that through his ancestry he is the rightful heir to the French throne. However, the French Dauphin, son of King Charles VI, mocks Henry's claim with a condescending and insulting gift of tennis balls as matching to his youth and vanity. This was a big mistake and infuriates Harry. In Act 2, Chorus reappears and describes the country's dedication to the war effort. Then we learn that the unseen, famous former drinking buddy of Henry V, Sir John Falstaff, has died and is lamented by his friends Bardolph, Nym, and Pistol, his wife Nell, and Falstaff's page. Also in Act 2, the king discovers a plot by three traitors, Richard, Earl of Cambridge, Henry Scroop of Masham, and Sir Thomas Grey, to assassinate Harry at Southampton. All three are executed before the troops leave for France. In Act 3, after crossing the English Channel, Henry and his troops besiege the French port city of Harfleur. Chorus says that the French King Charles VI offered Henry his daughter Catherine's hand in marriage, a dowry, plus some petty and unprofitable dukedoms, but Henry rejected the offer. At the siege at Harfleur, the English are beaten back at first, but Henry urges them on, saying, once more into the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead. After a bloody siege, the English take Harfleur, but Henry's forces are depleted by about half, and he decides not to go on to Paris, but instead moves up the coast to Calais. Meanwhile, the French command a powerful army and pursue Henry. They surround him near the small town of Agincourt, but knowing he is outnumbered, the night before the battle, Henry walks through the English camp in disguise, trying to comfort his soldiers and find out what they really think of him and their situation. He agonizes about the moral burden of being a king, asking God to steal my soldiers' hearts. In the morning, Henry rallies his nobles with the famous St. Crispin's Day speech, referring to his greatly outnumbered troops as "we few, we happy few, we band of brothers." The French herald Montjoy returns to ask if Henry will surrender himself, avoid certain defeat, and ransom his men's survival, but Henry once again says no and tells Montjoy to save his labor and to not return again just to ask the same question. After the fierce and bloody battle in which the English draw the French into an area where they can be trapped in mud and easily picked off through the use of extremely effective archers, Montjoy once again returns to Harry, asking not for ransom, but to collect the number of their dead. At this point, Harry does not yet know the outcome of the battle, but Montjoy tells him, "The day is yours." The victory turns out to be incredibly lopsided, with the French suffering 10,000 casualties. Meanwhile, the English lose a duke, an earl, a knight, a squire, and of all others but 25. Henry is humbled and says, "O God, thy arm was here." We also learn that Bardolph and Nymph have been hanged, and that Pistol's wife is now dead of syphilis back in an English hospital. Pistol says, "To England will I steal, and there I'll steal," indicating that he intends to return to his life of theft and lechery. Act 5 actually takes place several years later as the English and French negotiate a peace treaty, and Harry tries to woo the French princess Catherine, but neither speaks the other's language very well. However, the awkwardness of their communication actually helps Harry to achieve his goal. The scene ends with King Charles adopting Henry as his heir to the French throne. Chorus makes one final appearance and foreshadows the tumultuous reign of Henry's son Henry VI of England, saying, "Whose state so many had the managing, that they lost France and made his England bleed, which oft our stage hath shown." When we return, we'll look at some of the magnificent characters in Henry V. All right, now let's take a look at some of the major characters in this play. We'll start off with Henry V of England, who is called by many names, including Harry England by the French and Harry by himself. He surrounds himself with his nobles, including his brothers, the Duke of Gloucester and Clarence, his uncle, the Duke of Exeter, the Dukes of York, Salisbury, Westmoreland, and Warwick. All of the nobles remain loyal to him throughout the entire play. We see the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of Ely at the beginning of the play. They are there solely to let us know that the church is going to financially back Harry's crusade in France, but with their own self-interest uppermost in their minds. We have the three traitors, Richard Earl of Cambridge, Henry Scrope of Masson, and Sir Thomas Grey. Henry calls them English monsters and has them executed at Southampton. We have three English soldiers, John Bates, Alexander Court, and Michael Williams, who Harry interacts with the night before the Battle of Agincourt while he's still incognito. King Charles VI of France is surrounded by his son, the Dauphin, his daughter Catherine, Alice, her gentlewoman and rather pitiful translator, and his French noblemen, including the Constable of France. Since Shakespeare was English, the Frenchmen are depicted as arrogant, weak, and poor fighters. There's also Captain Gower, an Englishman, Captain Fluellen, a Welshman, Captain McMorris, an Irishman, and Captain Jamie, a Scot. Shakespeare uses them to add some comedic humor, especially from Captain Fluellen, who mispronounces many English words and is a great admirer of Alexander the Great, who he calls Alexander the Pig by mistake, Pompey, and ancient Roman warriors. We also see the friends of the unseen Sir John Falstaff, who dies early in the second act. They are Bardolph, Corporal Nym, and Ancient Pistol, all of whom are thieves and pickpockets. There's also the boy who was formerly Falstaff's page, whom Shakespeare uses to fill the audience in about the cowardly and despicable nature of these men into whose service he's been thrown. Unlike the adults, the boy is disgusted with their unlawful and detestable behavior and longs to be free of their company. And finally, we have Mistress Nell Quickly, who we learn was engaged to Nym, but is now married to Pistol. In one of Shakespeare's most complex scenes, we see how Falstaff's friends react to the news of his death, and once again, as in Henry IV Part 2, we see that Nell Quickly has good intentions, but rarely ever knows what she's talking about. This is her in Act 2, Scene 3, talking about Falstaff's final hours. Bardolph says, "Oh, I wish I was with him, whether he's in heaven or hell." And she says, "Nay, sure, he's not in hell. He's in Arthur's bosom, if ever man went to Arthur's bosom." She's mistakenly quoting Abraham's bosom from the Bible. He made a finer end and went away, and it had been any Christian child. In other words, he was as sure to go to heaven as any newly baptized baby that died immediately without committing a sin. He parted even just between 12 and 1, even at the turn of the tide, for after I saw him fumble with the sheets and play with flowers and smile upon his finger's end, I knew there was but one way, for his nose was as sharp as a pen, and babbled of green fields. Well, these are signs of alcoholism, and the reference to green fields is from the 23rd Psalm, also another biblical reference. "How now, Sir John," quoth I. "What, man, be of good cheer." So he cried out, "God, God, God," 3 or 4 times. Now I, to comfort him, bid him he should not think of God. I hoped there was no need to trouble himself with any such thoughts yet. What terrible advice to give a dying man on his deathbed! So he bade me lay more clothes on his feet. I put my hand into the bed and felt them, and they were as cold as any stone. Then I fell to his knees, and so upward, and all was as cold as any stone. Well, stone is a reference to a testicle, and this particular passage is from Plato's account of the death of Socrates. Nym says, "They say he cried out a sack." "Ah, that he did." Bardolph says, "And of women." "Nah, that he did not." And the boy says, "Yeah, that he did. He said they were devils incarnate." The hostess, misunderstanding again, says, "He could never abide carnation. 'Twas a color he never liked." The boy said, "They said once the devil would have him about women." And the hostess is forced to concede, "He did in some sort indeed handle women, but then he was rheumatic and talked of the whore of Babylon." Again, this is another biblical reference. This passage is an excellent example of the great, rich abundance throughout this play. When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from Henry V. Just like in the 2 previous history plays, Shakespeare keeps his major characters in clusters. We see friends of Falstaff, we see Harry's nobles together, we see Captains Llewellyn, McMorris, Jamie, and Gower together. We see the French officers and the French king together. We see Catherine and Alice together. And we see John Bates, Alexander Court, and Michael Williams, the 3 English soldiers, together. Shakespeare allows several of his characters to interact with them, including the king, Pistol, Montjoy, Exeter, and Llewellyn. We also see Harry in disguise again, like he was in the previous 2 plays, in order here to find out what his people think of him when they don't know that he can hear them. He does this with Llewellyn, Pistol, and the 3 English soldiers. We also see Harry playing a prank on Michael Williams when he challenges him without revealing that he is the king. And instead of punishing him, he gives him a glove filled with crowns for being a good sport and shows that he's one also. This is an example of Harry demonstrating what use he made of his wilder days. There are about 10 truly memorable scenes that are worth acknowledging in this play. In Act 1, Scene 2, Harry gets tennis balls from the Dauphin, who mocks him for being a playboy. This results in the ominous "turn your balls to gunstone" speech, which threatens an invasion into France. Here's Harry's reaction. "We are glad the Dauphin is so pleasant with us. His present and your pains we thank you for. When we have matched our rackets to these balls, we will in France, by God's grace, play a set, shall strike his father's crown into the hazard. Tell him he hath made a match with such a wrangler that all the courts of France will be disturbed with chases. And we understand him well, how he comes o'er us with our wilder days, not measuring what use we made of them." He continues, "But tell the Dauphin, I will keep my state, be like a king, and show my sail of greatness when I do rouse me in my throne of France." He continues again, "But I will rise there with so full a glory that I will dazzle all the eyes of France, yea, strike the Dauphin blind to look on us, and tell the pleasant prince, this mock of his hath turned his balls to gunstones." Gunstones are rocks that they used before they had cannonballs to stuff in the cannon. "And his soul shall stand sore charged for the wasteful vengeance that shall fly with them. For many 1,000 widows shall this his mock out of their dear husbands, mock mothers from their sons, mock castles down, and some are yet ungotten and unborn that shall have cause to curse the Dauphin's scorn. So get ye hence in peace, and tell the Dauphin, his jest will savour but of shallow wit, when thousands weep more than did laugh at it." In Act 2, Scene 1, we learn of the death of Falstaff and see him mourned and remembered by his friends. In Act 2, Scene 2, we see the discovery of the 3 English monsters, traitors to Henry V, who are discovered and executed. In Act 3, Scene 1, we see the assault on the town of Harfleur, where we see that Harry knows how to become a wartime king. In Act 3, Scene 3, Harry warns the governor of Harfleur that he will destroy his town if he does not yield. In Act 3, Scene 4, which is all in French, we see Catherine learning to speak English by her less than skilled interpreter. It's meant to add some humor to the serious and bloody play, since neither of them knows how to correctly pronounce some of the words, and the princess is highly offended when hearing and misunderstanding the vulgar mispronunciations of some of the English words. In Act 4, Scene 1, we see a little touch of Harry in the night, wherein Harry walks disguised through the English camp to learn how his soldiers feel about the Battle of Agincourt the next day. In Act 4, Scene 3, Harry delivers his famous Band of Brothers speech. In Act 4, Scene 7, Harry, angry at the discovery of the slaughtered boys, addresses the French herald and learns that Harry has won the day. And in Act 5, Scene 2, Harry must woo Catherine, and despite the fact that neither of them speaks the other's language, he prevails. As you can see, there certainly is a lot to take in. Until I did this episode, I couldn't truly appreciate what an absolute masterpiece Henry V really is as a play. Henry V is replete with many themes, including those of opportunity and responsibility. For example, Harry has the opportunity to win France and strengthen his position as a newly crowned king of England with his people, despite the fact that his father usurped Richard II to ascend to the throne. Meanwhile, Bardolph, Pistol, and Nym see the war as an opportunity to steal everything they can that isn't nailed down. At Harfleur, King Harry sees an opportunity to take the town as a place to hole up until they can safely make their way to Calais. This is because winter is coming upon his troops, and he's lost half of his men since he came to France. Harry also sees wedding Catherine as an opportunity to create a lasting peace treaty with France, which would benefit both nations. When it comes to responsibility, Harry's number one concern is to demonstrate that he is a worthy leader and a subject of God. For Pistol, once Falstaff dies, his former ancient takes over as the leader of his pack. In order to win Harfleur, Harry must talk tough, as we hear in his speech to the governor before he opens the gates. This is Act 3, Scene 3. How yet resolves the governor of the town? This is the latest parle we will admit. Therefore, to our best mercy give yourselves, or, like to men proud of destruction, defy us to our worst. If I begin the battery once again, I will not leave the half-achieved Harfleur, till in her ashes she lies buried. The gates of mercy shall be all shut up, and the fleshed soldiers, rough and hard of heart, in liberty of bloody hand, shall range with conscience wide as hell, mowing like grass your fresh fair virgins and your flowering infants. Therefore, you men of Harfleur, take pity on your town and of your people, whilst yet my soldiers are in my command, whilst yet the cool and temperate wind of grace overblows the filthy and contagious clouds of heady murder, spoil, and villainy. If not, why in a moment look to see the blind and bloody soldier with foul hand desire the locks of your shrill shrieking daughters, your fathers taken by the silver beards and their most reverend heads dashed to the walls, your naked infants spitted on pikes, whilst the mad mothers with their howls confused. What say you? Will you yield and this avoid? Or guilty in defense be thus destroyed? Talk about powerful, convincing, and intimidating. You could see why this was such an effective speech. And we'll hear Harry's inner thoughts about being a king the night before the Battle of Agincourt as he goes disguised among his troops. This is in Act 4, Scene 1. What infinite heart's ease must kings neglect that private men enjoy? And what have kings that privates have not too, save ceremony, save general ceremony? Canst thou, when thou command'st the beggar's knee, command the health of it? No, thou proud dream that plays so subtly with a king's repose. I am a king that find thee, and I know 'tis not the bomb, the scepter, and the ball, the sword, the mace, the crown imperial, the intertissued robe of gold and pearl, the farced title running for the king, the throne he sits on, nor the tide of pomp that beats upon the high shore of this world. No, not all these, thrice gorgeous ceremony, not all these, laid in bed majestical, can sleep so soundly as the wretched slave who, with a body filled and vacant mind, gets him to rest, crammed with distressful bread, never sees horrid night, the child of hell, but like a lackey from the rise to set, sweats in the eye of Phoebus, and all night sleeps in Elysium. And but for ceremony, such a wretch, winding up days with toil and nights with sleep, had the forehand and vantage of a king. King Harry balances the qualities of justice and mercy throughout the entire play. For example, at Southampton, he tells his uncle Exeter to enrich the drunken man who railed against his person due to excessive wine, but he has Cambridge, Scrope, and Grey executed for the Southampton plot against his life, calling them English monsters. At Harfleur, once the governor opens the gate and lets his troops in, Harry says to his uncle Exeter, "Use mercy to them all." But at the Battle of Agincourt, Harry orders all of the French prisoners killed. His primary reason for doing so was because there were so many French troops that the prisoners practically outnumbered the entire English army, and there was fear that they would not be able to control the vast number of them and still fight a battle against the remaining French troops who still outnumbered the English by enormous odds. And when Harry confronts Michael Williams about having challenged him the night before the Battle of Agincourt, he shows his mercy when Williams makes his case that the king did not present himself as a king and should therefore be responsible for his own actions. Harry agrees and instructs his uncle Exeter to fill his glove with crowns and give it to Williams. Yet when it comes to executing Bardolph, his old drinking buddy, for robbing a church of a pax, this is a tablet, he says, "We would have all such offenders so cut off, and we here give express charge that in our marches through the country, there being nothing compelled from the villages, nothing taken but paid for, none of the French upbraided or abused in disdainful language, for when lenity and cruelty play for a kingdom, the gentler gamester is the soonest winner." In other words, he understands that as the victor, he wants the French soldiers to respect him, and that's why he continuously demonstrates his honor to God throughout the entire play. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in Henry V. Without a doubt, Shakespeare's most powerful lines in Henry V are his battle speeches. The first one takes place outside the town of Harfleur. After being pushed back, Harry urges his troops to keep up their efforts to win the town. This begins Act 3, Scene 1. "Once more until the breach, dear friends, once more, or close up the wall with our English dead. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility, but when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage, then lend the eye of terrible aspect, let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon, let the brow overwhelm it as fearfully as it does a gulled rock, overhang and jutty his confounded base swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. Now set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide, hold hard the breath, and bend up every spirit to his full height. Dishonor not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you called fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood, and teach them how to war. And you, good yeomen, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the mettle of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not, for there is none of you so mean and base that hath not nobler lustre in your eyes. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry God for Harry, England, and St. George. As you can imagine, this speech was very effective, and after some very threatening words to the governor, the town yields. But the most famous speech of the entire play, and certainly Shakespeare's most patriotic speech, is Henry's rousing Band of Brothers speech spoken on St. Crispin's Day. It takes place in Act 4, Scene 3, just before the famous Battle of Agincourt, which will determine the outcome of the war. Westmoreland says, "Oh, that we now had here but 1/10,000 of those men in England that do not work today." And King Henry says, "What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin, if we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more. By Jove, I am not covetous for gold, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. It yearns me not if men my garments wear, such outward things do not in my desires. But if it is a sin to covet, which it certainly is, I am the most offending soul alive. No, faith, my coz, wish not a man from England. God's peace, I would not lose so great an honour as one man more, methinks, would share from me for the best hope I have. Oh, do not wish one more. Rather proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall see this day and live to old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors and say, "Tomorrow is St. Crispian." Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, "These wounds had I on Crispian's day." Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day till the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed. They were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. There are also some other magnificent shorter lines that are worth including. For example, the Dauphin says to his father the king in Act 2, Scene 4, "Coward dogs most spend their mouths when what they seem to threaten runs before them." What he's saying is that it's easy to talk big to an enemy when he's far away. The Dauphin also says, "Self-love, my liege, is not so vile a sin as self-neglecting." In other words, it's not vanity to take an interest in your own protection. In Act 4, Scene 1, we hear the English soldier Michael Williams utter two somber messages. The first is, "We see yonder the beginning of the day, but I think we shall ne'er see the end of it." This was a great way for Shakespeare to make his audience aware of the thoughts and fears of the English troops the night before their bloodiest battle. The second comment is, "I am afeard there are few die well that die in a battle, for how can they charitably dispose of anything when blood is their argument?" Notice that this is Shakespeare weighing in on the soldier's perspective without necessarily agreeing with the commentary. In Act 4, Scene 7, we see Llewellyn in his most charming humor. After he says to the king that Welshman fought well with his grandfather's battle at the same site, Harry says, "For I am Welsh, you know, good countryman." And Llewellyn emotionally replies, "All the water in Wye, which is a river, cannot wash your majesty's Welsh blood out of your body. I can tell you that. God bless it and preserve it, as long as it pleases his grace and his majesty too." And King Henry says, "Thanks, good my countrymen." Llewellyn, now overwhelmed, says, "By Jesu, I am your majesty's countryman. I care not who know it. I will confess it to all the world. I need not be ashamed of your majesty. Praise be to God, so long as your majesty is an honest man." And Harry humbly replies, "God keep me so," demonstrating once again that he sees himself as fighting with God on his side. And finally, in Act 5, Scene 2, we see all the magnificent charm of Catherine when she meets her prearranged future husband, Henry V, and charmingly and innocently tells him, "Your majesty shall mock at me. I cannot speak your England." How could you not love her? As far as turning points go, the first one occurs right at the beginning when we see Hal, the former playboy, is now taking his role as Henry V, the king, very seriously. He has no hesitations about bringing the English armies to France and claiming his right as their king. Next, we see that he's not afraid to threaten and ransack Harfleur if he's not allowed into the town. And of course, the biggest turning point in the entire play is the incredible underdog victory in the Battle of Agincourt. There are also several correlations to some of the other Shakespeare plays here. For example, when it comes to traitors in Henry V, we see the 3 traitors apprehended at Southampton. In Henry IV, Part 2, we saw Prince John and Westmoreland capture and arrest traitors in the forest of Gultrays. At the end of Coriolanus, Tullus Aufidius calls Coriolanus a traitor and slays him. In Julius Caesar, Brutus and Cassius and all the other assassins are hunted down as traitors. And in Richard III, anyone who becomes a perceived enemy of Richard is dubbed a traitor and is quickly dispatched to the Tower. Henry V is also taunted once again for being a playboy in his youth, this time when the Dauphin sends him tennis balls. We saw this primarily from his father in Henry IV, both in parts 1 and 2. And finally, we see a man and woman destined to be married as a result of a negotiation, but who do not speak the same language. Fortunately, that's not a deal breaker. In fact, it could actually turn out to be a very happy union, as we saw in Henry IV, Part 1, when the English Edmund Mortimer married Owen Glendower's Welsh-speaking daughter. This happens also when Pistol almost accidentally captures a French soldier but cannot understand what he's saying and must use the boy to interpret for him. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about Henry V. While preparing to do this episode, I did some research and I came across some interesting facts about Henry V. Even though Shakespeare promised in the epilogue at the end of Henry IV, Part 2, that Sir John Falstaff would return in the next play, he never appears on stage, and all we learn early on is that he's died. So why didn't Shakespeare bring Falstaff back in Henry V? One possible reason is that the actor who played him left the company shortly after Henry IV, Part 2. Although we cannot know this for certain, rest assured that we will see him once again when he returns in The Merry Wives of Windsor. Nym is an Old English word which means to steal. How appropriate. When Harry was only 16 years old, he fought against Hotspur in the Battle of Shrewsbury. He was almost killed by an arrow in his left cheekbone. However, a physician created a tool to remove the embedded arrowhead, and Harry survived, although he had a permanent scar for the rest of his life. The actual Southampton plot was an attempt to replace Henry V with Edmund Mortimer, the 5th Earl of March, who had been considered Richard II's presumptive heir to the throne. And while the traitors were punished, Edmund Mortimer stayed loyal to Henry V and was not involved in the plot. When we get to Henry VI, Part 1, we'll see how important the Mortimers still are as a threat to the king in that play. The Battle of Agincourt took place on October 25th, St. Crispin's Day in 1415. Although Henry had brought 11,000 men with him from England, he had lost half of them to disease in the first 5 weeks. At Agincourt, the French had 20,000 soldiers and outnumbered Henry's troops by about 5 to 1. Most of Harry's troops were excellent longbow marksmen who had mandatorily trained in their craft for many years. There were 2 wooded areas that stood on either side of the field, which made it difficult for the French to charge. The English stood their ground, forcing the French to advance through a very muddy and difficult field in their heavy armor. The marksmen fired volley after volley of arrows from each side of the field, decimating the French troops. The archers were also protected by a line of pointed stakes that prevented full-on assaults by the French. Henry had more than 3,000 prisoners executed because the English could not manage so great a number and fight a much larger army at the same time. More than 6,000 Frenchmen died at the Battle of Agincourt. The English troops lost less than 400 men. Harry's battle was one of the greatest military achievements in world history, but he died at the height of his popularity only 2 years later of dysentery, following another battle near Paris after reigning as king for only 9 years. Following Henry V's death, his wife Catherine's surprise marriage to Sir Owen Tudor helped lead to the rise of the House of Tudor's fortunes and to her Tudor grandson's eventual elevation to the throne as King Henry VII of England. In 1988, the band Blondie, whose lead singer was the bleach blonde Deborah Harry, released a remixed album of its greatest hits. The album was entitled Once More Into the Bleach. In 2001, there was a TV miniseries about a 101st Airborne Division mission set in World War II entitled Band of Brothers. And in 1956, the Stratford Shakespeare Festival put on a production of Henry V with Christopher Plummer playing Henry V and his understudy, William Shatner, who filled in for him for one performance. 35 years later, in the 1991 film Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the title of which comes from Hamlet, Christopher Plummer plays a Klingon warrior who is frequently quoting lines from Shakespeare's plays while doing battle with Captain Kirk, played by his former understudy, William Shatner. When we return, we'll look at some of the incredible actors from the 1979 BBC Shakespeare version of Henry V. All right, now let's take a look at some of the actors from the 1979 BBC Shakespeare version of Henry V. Alec McCowan, who plays Chorus, also played Malvolio in Twelfth Night in 1980, and the Bishop of Ely in Kenneth Branagh's version of Henry V in 1989. Brian Poiser continues to play Gower as he did in Henry IV Part 2, and also played the first Volscian senator in Coriolanus in 1984. David Gwilym once again plays Hal, now Henry V, as he did in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, all in 1979. Robert Edwards once again plays Prince John of Lancaster, and David Buck once again plays the Earl of Westmoreland, continuing their roles in Henry V. Brian Pingle, who plays the unforgettable Pistol in Henry IV Part 2, reprises his role in Henry V. Rob Beecham, who plays the Earl of Warwick in Henry IV Part 2, continues his role in Henry V. Gordon Gestello once again plays Bardolph as he did in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, and the 1982 version of The Merry Wives of Windsor. He also plays a fisherman of Pentapolis in the 1984 version of Pericles, Prince of Tyre. William Whymper, who plays the Earl of Cambridge, also played Sir Stephen Scrope in Richard II in 1978, and Chatillon in The Life and Death of King John in 1984. Tim Wilton, who played Fluellen, also played the first gravedigger in Hamlet, also in 1979. Robert Ashby, who plays the Earl of Salisbury, also played Thaliard and the Fifth Knight in Pericles, Prince of Tyre in 1979. Roger Davenport, who played the Duke of Clarence in Henry IV Part 2, reprises his role in Henry V. John Ritchie, who plays Court, also played the groom in Richard II in 1978. Paddy Ward, who plays Captain McMorris, played the keeper in Richard II, again in 1978. John Fowler, who played the boy in Henry IV Part 2, reprises his role in Henry V, and also played flute in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1981. Julian Glover, who plays the Constable of France, played the Duke of Buckingham in Henry VIII, also in 1979. Garrick Hagon, who plays Montjoy the French Herald, also played Octavius Caesar in Julius Caesar that same year. Jeffrey Holland, who plays Corporal Nym in Henry IV Part 2 and reprised his role in Henry V, also played the Duke of Surrey in Richard II, and William in As You Like It, both in 1978. Clifford Parrish, who plays the Duke of Exeter, also played a citizen of Angier in The Life and Death of King John in 1984. Ronald Cherney, who plays a messenger, also played an English messenger in The Life and Death of King John, also 1984. George Howe, who plays Sir Thomas Erpingham, also played Paulina's steward in The Winter's Tale and Euphronios in Antony and Cleopatra, both in 1981, and The Doctor in King Lear in 1982. And finally, Brenda Bruce, who continues her role as Mistress Quickly in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, also played the first witch in the 1983 version of Macbeth, but was replaced as Mistress Quickly by Elizabeth Spriggs in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1982. I also want to mention the Shakespeare films directed by Kenneth Branagh. I've seen the first 8, and all of them are of excellent quality and are performed by impeccable actors. Although he hasn't done every single Shakespeare play, the 10 that I am aware of are all worth watching. They are, in chronological order, Twelfth Night in 1988, Henry V in 1989, in which he plays Henry V, Much Ado About Nothing in 1993, in which he also plays Benedick, Othello in 1995, in which he also plays Iago, Hamlet in 1996, in which he plays Hamlet in the 19th century, Love's Labour's Lost in 2000, in which he plays Barone in a 1930s musical setting, As You Like It in 2006, in a late 19th century setting as an English colony in Japan, Macbeth in 2013, in which he plays Macbeth, The Winter's Tale in 2015, in which he plays Leontes, and Romeo and Juliet in 2016. In Henry V, Branagh uses some of his regulars, including the incredible Brian Blessed as the Duke of Exeter, Jimmy Ewell as Captain Jamie, Patrick Doyle as Court, Richard Briers as Bardolph, plus Ian Holm as Fluellen, Christopher Ravenscroft as Montjoy, Derek Jacobi as Chorus, Judi Dench as Mistress Quickly, Emma Thompson as Catherine, and a very young Christian Bale who went on to play Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy. And now get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called You, Sir, Are a Usurper. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called You, Sir, Are a Usurper. Name the play in which the following characters usurp the throne and from whom. Number 1, Henry Bolingbroke. Number 2, Duke Ferdinand. And number 3, Antonio, Duke of Milan. When we return, I'll give you the answers and we'll look at some relevant lessons from Henry V. Okay, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called You, Sir, Are a Usurper. You were to name the play in which the following characters usurped the throne and from whom. Number 1 was Henry Bolingbroke. That was, of course, from Richard II in Richard II. Number 2 was Duke Ferdinand. That was from Duke Senior in As You Like It. And number 3, Antonio, Duke of Milan. That was from Prospero in The Tempest. Now let's take a look at some relevant lessons from Henry V. First, sometimes an implied threat is just as significant and persuasive as a real threat, especially if it's an offer the other person can't refuse. Henry V uses some pretty threatening words to get the governor of Harfleur to open his gates, and it works. But as soon as the governor agrees to Henry's terms, the king gives instructions to his uncle Exeter to use mercy to them all. Next, as the late NFL coach Don Shula said, failure isn't fatal, success doesn't last. The French may have been down, but they certainly weren't out. We're going to see that some more in Henry VI, Part 1, when even after all the battles the English won under Henry V, they're once again lost by his successor. And finally, the price of greatness is responsibility. You need to learn when to be firm and when to be flexible. Henry V had Bardolph executed for robbing a church to set an example for his other men, but he also gave the man with whom he picked to fight while he was disguised a glove full of crowns, demonstrating that even a king can be gracious and a good sport when it comes to playing practical jokes. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo on Shakespeare. Please join me next time when one best friend double-crosses the other and forgets his own girl to go after another.